Hi, Homeworthy. I'm Paloma. Welcome to my home in Houston.
You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story.
Hi, I'm Paloma Contreras. I'm an interior designer, and you're in my home in Houston, Texas. So we moved into this house 2 years ago this month, actually, and we purchased it 2.5 years ago after looking for almost a year. So around that time, I have a 3.5-year-old daughter. She was a little under a year old, and we had outgrown our last place. So it was time to move to a bigger house and also to a different neighborhood. So we were previously in Houston's Montrose neighborhood, which is wonderful and artsy and like super cool, but there weren't a ton of children on the street. And so we wanted to be in a more family-friendly neighborhood and decided we wanted to live in West University Place, which is basically like Mayberry in the middle of Houston. It's 10 minutes from downtown, 5 minutes from the medical center, but it really has that small town feel. So we looked and looked for, like I said, almost a year and weren't finding anything. It was a really sort of competitive time in the marketplace. And I'd all but given up and was starting to toy with the idea of building a house and just coming to terms with the fact that it would take longer than we initially thought. And as that happened, I got a call from my realtor who said, "This house is coming on the market. It's a pocket listing. Do you want to see it? I can get you in first." And so we came, and being a decorator, I personally love a more traditional floor plan. I love a center hallway. I love having proper rooms rather than like big open spaces, which had become so popular in terms of new builds. And that was a lot of what we were seeing. And I also grew frustrated by the fact that as a designer, I feel like I kind of know too much. Like I can identify what the fixtures are and like the quality of the materials and what those things cost. And they weren't always matching up to the price tags. So when we walked into this house, it was like almost an instant yes, because the bones were great. I knew I could make it my own. The previous owners had made some updates to the kitchen and the bathroom. It's a 1987 house, so it's not an old house, but because in that time period, people were building more traditional layouts that you would see in, say, a house from the 1930s. It really ticked a lot of boxes for us. And we, almost immediately knew that this was the house for us. One of the things that initially drew us to this home was the impression that it made immediately upon walking into it. I loved how wide this entryway was. It felt very elegant and welcoming and was great for entertaining. And then of course, on either side, you have this very traditional floor plan with the living room on one side and the dining room on the other. But another thing that was really sort of attracted to me was that we had traditional oak floors in this house rather than like the big wide plank, more distressed looking floors that have become so popular, which I love and we use in projects all the time. But for my own house, I wanted something that felt a little bit more classic. So it was fun that the stain on the floors was beautiful. And I also loved that the original floors to the house featured this Versailles pattern with sort of like a parquet inlay pattern in the entryway, which sort of makes it feel like a special space rather than just a pass-through. I'll show you one of my favorite pieces in the house. I mentioned that I love antiques, and this piece is very special to me because I'm pretty sure it was the first antique I ever bought. So I found this at an antiques fair in Paris several years ago and fell in love with it. And I was actually on an antique shopping tour. So I learned how to buy antiques from these wonderful women from Atlanta on this trip with all these other ladies, and fell in love with this particular commode. And since starting my store 6 years ago, I have bought countless antique French chests, but I've never come across one that was as beautiful as this one. So it has this gorgeous marquetry inlay on the drawer fronts that is so special. And of course, most often the tops are added on later on. So this is probably a newer top, but it's beautiful, narrow Marquina marble, which I think really gives the space a graphic touch. I always say it's important to have something black or dark in any space because it sort of keeps it from floating away. and gives it a little sense of gravitas. And this is really just like a little tableau of things that I love, some favorite books, these rock crystal objects I also found at the flea market in Paris. There's a little bronze like sculpture that I found at the flea market in Paris and brought home with me on a trip. And we have lots of plants and myrtle topiaries throughout the house. This beautiful lamp is by one of my favorite makers, Christopher Spitzmiller, and he does these gorgeous glazes with beautiful depth of color. And, you know, one of the things that I think is really special about a house and how it sort of sets the tone and tells a story about the people who live there is the art. And I tend to really love abstract, kind of graphic, modern art, contemporary art. And I feel like it's a really nice foil to some of the more feminine or traditional elements of my design work. So this piece in particular is by a French artist named Jacques Nestlé. It's from the 1960s. I also bought it on one of these trips to France and have since collected a few other pieces of his. So there's one by the door that's his. This is actually his, and this is a funny piece. I saw it when I was on one of these trips and fell in love with it. I loved this silver leaf frame and just how striking and bold this black canvas was. But I understand it's not for everybody. I remember on a visit when I first hung it in our old house, my sister-in-law came in. My sister-in-law, bless her, I love her so much, but we're very different. She's a high school science teacher. And she like went up to it and touched it and was like, what? Like, this is art, but you know, to thine own self be true. It's art to me and I love it. And then this is a really cool piece. It's by a Japanese artist and it's contemporary from 2019, an artist named Kamiya. And these are actually pieces of steel that have been painted and manipulated and arranged in these really cool compositions that feel like an abstract painting. So as you walk in from the entry, you can either go left into the living room or right into the dining room. The living room is one of my favorite spaces. In this house, I really wanted to challenge myself to use more color. Our last house was a little bit more neutral and higher contrast, and I wanted to sort of play into a more feminine palette. I think part of it was having a young daughter and just loving and leaning into very girly things. So what was interesting about this house was, I didn't realize this when we bought it, the windows are very shallow. And so that made it difficult to hang traditional drapery. I think we only have true curtains or drapery in 3 rooms, and everywhere else, because of the depth of the windows, we had to do shades. So that presented a fun design challenge. And I was very inspired by one of my design heroes, Virginie, and in his temple, which he has in the English countryside, it's this beautiful garden folly that is referred to as a temple. It's temple pink, and he has these beautiful balloon shades that are much more ornate than these, but that was kind of my inspiration. And so the jumping off point really for the room. So we went with these silk pink balloon shades or London shades that you see throughout the room. And I also really wanted to keep it kind of crisp and neutral to let the color and the pattern really come to light. So you'll notice like there's a great wool carpet or rug that is a very light color, sort of a beige. There's a white sofa, also very feminine with this box pleated skirt. I just felt like it was very timeless and classic and pretty. And then on top of that, we have this beautiful cabinet out floral printed fabric on a pair of pillows, and then these sweet green velvet pillows as well that feature one of my take trims from my Schumacher collection. This one's the Margot Fret.
So the sofa is paired with these slipper chairs that are in the Louis XVI style, so as classic as it gets. And I've upholstered them in this fabric that gets a lot of questions. People always ask about it. It's one of my favorites. It's Brunswick Fille Bromo Velvet in this beautiful green colorway. It has a lot of dimension and texture and I don't know, like 3 or 4 different hues of green. So it's a really beautiful fabric that feels really dimensional. The coffee table is a contemporary piece. It's from the Lacquer Company and was designed by Virginie, that design hero of mine that I mentioned. And it just has a little tableau of things that I love. This end table is Baguesse and it's vintage. I found this in Paris as well. And then I paired that on the other side with a super contemporary little accent table, this sort of brass cube that I think is sort of sexy and adds like an unexpected kind of disco touch to the room that you wouldn't expect from something that felt otherwise so buttoned up. I think it's always important to have an element of surprise. This console here was actually my parents' as far back as the 70s. I think they had it in their place before they had me, and then it was in our house growing up forever. I remember it being kind of like a lime green, and then they gave it to me. I've painted it a few different colors, and when we designed this room, I felt like it needed that kind of darker foil that we talked about. So we painted it, we lacquered it this chocolate brown, and I've layered it with, you know, some things that I love, a vintage lamp, a couple of sculptures, and we always have some live plants everywhere. This mirror is also very classic. It's a Georgian mirror. It dates back to the 1800s, and I bought this at auction for a song, and it was in my old house and worked really well here. And then we have some club chairs that are super comfortable. So this is a room where we really like, when we entertain people, we gather here. This is where we're having a drink before dinner. And this is also where my daughter likes to like come and chat, just the two of us every now and then. Or if she's upset about something, she always runs to this sofa and I run after her to comfort her. So we do use this room pretty much on a daily basis. But it's, you know, certainly our formal room that we don't hang out in terms of like playing or eating, but more for entertaining. This piece here is really special to me. This painting is from an artist from New Orleans named Alexis Walter, who I've known for, I guess, 10 years now probably. And she and I worked on a show house together. So I did my very first show house in 2016 in New Orleans, and she loaned this beautiful piece to me, and at the end she realized how much I loved it and she gave it to me as a gift. And ever since, I've bought lots of pieces from her for different projects, and we carry her work in my shop. So it has a lot of special meaning, and I just love the colors in it. It's, you know, sort of soft but also punchy with that bit of chartreuse and the black, the graphite coming through, those pops of red. So it really complements this room. Again, to keep it from not going so soft. The same is true of the marble that we did around the fireplace. When we bought the house, it was still the original 1980s, like shiny green marble. And I wanted it to feel a little bit more graphic and updated contemporary. So we did a Nero Marquina in a honed finish that I think sort of grounds the room and adds kind of a masculine element to it that it really needs. And to that end, the light fixture in this room is also a lot more contemporary. This is the Comtesse chandelier from my collection for visual comfort. I love the scale of it. I love the drama of it, but it works really well in rooms like this that don't have super high ceilings, and still allows you to make a cool statement. And it's really nice in the evenings if we're entertaining other friends in here, adults only, where we like dim all the lights down and just have that sort of reflecting light onto the ceiling and have some low lamp light. It just sets a really nice mood. But speaking of ceiling heights, I'll show you these other pieces that are also very, very special to me. So I have this series of mixed media works by an artist out of Birmingham named Jane Timberlake Cooper. In my previous house, if you are familiar with my work, you may have seen them in my old dining room, and they were a series of 9. So they were stacked in a grid of 9, 3 across and 3 high. Unfortunately, this house has much lower ceilings than our old house did, so I had to scale that down to 6. But I love how they work in unison as a series to have such visual impact. They're very soft, you know, they're mostly white. There's some graphite and charcoal coming through, and you see those bits. They're kind of Twombly inspired. Cy Twombly is my favorite artist, so anything that is reminiscent of the movement in his work is always very evocative to me. But I think that when you group pieces together, they just have such tremendous impact, even if the pieces themselves are quieter, such as these. And I'll show you, before we pop into the bar, another piece that I love by another artist that is near and dear to me, Kimberly Moore from Florida. She is really cool in the sense that her kind of thing, the way that she approaches art, is by starting with the frame, which I think is really interesting. She sources vintage and antique frames. I mean, I don't know that that's her exact process, but she sources antique and vintage frames and then paints these really cool modern and abstract compositions. Sometimes they're very quiet and neutral, and other times they're bold and beautiful, kind of like this one. And there was something about this particular composition that felt a little sort of Picasso or Moreau inspired to me. And again, I felt like the colors worked really well in a room that is otherwise like so light and pretty and fresh. The renovation was super quick. It happened lightning fast because we had taken possession of the house on March 1st and we needed to be out of our house, our previous house, by the end of March. So my contractor was wonderful and we got a plan together and really thought about what was critical path in terms of the most disruptive things that we wouldn't want to be living in the house for. So tile work, paint, that kind of thing. And then other things like, you know, changing out light fixtures and cabinet hardware and wallpaper. Those things came over time. So in those 30 days, we essentially painted every room. The kitchen was remodeled by the previous owners with an architect and a different designer in terms of the layout of the space because it was kind of choppy. But we went in and updated the paint, all of the materials, all of the surfaces, so the tile backsplash, the countertops, all of those things, the hardware, the lighting. And we did that in all of the bathrooms as well, except for the primary bathroom. So I think if you're going through a renovation, it's really important to be realistic about your timeline and your budget. And I say this to my design clients all the time. You know, you can have the world, but then your budget has to be unlimited and your timeline has to just go on forever. So obviously we know those resources are finite, so it's super critical to prioritize where you want to spend the bulk of your time, energy, and obviously resources. So for us, it was all of those big things. And then we just sort of, you know, we moved in and it was painted and the bathrooms were done. And those were things that allowed us to then take our time making it our own, bringing in new wallpaper and drapery and obviously our furniture and our lighting and all of that. So if you'll follow me into the bar, I'll show you a little bit of the space. So this room was added on by the previous owners of the house. I believe this was a closet before. It was expanded and they configured it and obviously added all of the cabinet work and the refrigerator and all of that. But it was painted kind of like an army green, which was lovely, but it wasn't the vibe that I wanted. And I really wanted this room to feel like a little jewel box moment. So we painted it this beautiful peacock blue and Hollandic paint from Fine Paints of Europe, so it has that beautiful lacquer finish. And truth be told, we don't use this space a ton unless we're entertaining, but it's just fun to have, and it's an opportunity to, you know, display some pretty glassware and some artwork as well. I always talk about like styling shelves, and that can be in a bar or in a living space. I'll show you my other shelves shortly. I think it's really important to always have varying heights of things and not to just have glassware solely displayed on your bar shelf. So you'll see we have like interesting objects and boxes and little pieces of art that are tucked in and sort of leaning. And I think that makes the space or the shelves feel a lot more dynamic. And you'll see things like from our travels, you know, we collect matchbooks from different dinners and restaurants that we go to. So that always has like a little bit of a special personal touch. Part of what inspired the choice for this color was I love these sort of Prussian blues that you see. Again, I'm such a Francophile. I feel like everything goes back to Paris, but those beautiful high sheen doors that you see as you're walking through the streets, so often they're in these gorgeous shades of blue. I love Prussian blue in particular because it has a little bit of green in it, so it's not too preppy. So it feels moody. It really sets kind of like a vibe. Again, I felt like this could be a jewel box moment and kind of like a sexy foil to the femininity of the living room, but it also complements, shortly you'll see the family room as well, which is a much more casual space, but it really works with the color palette in both of those rooms and it's tucked in between them. So I always say there has to be sort of like a common thread that ties the various rooms together. They can each tell their own story, but they have to be part of the same book at the end of the day. Join me in the family room. So aside from the kitchen, the family room is a space that we spend the most time in as a family, the three of us. This is where you'll find us on Saturday morning, afternoon, weeknights. This is where we hang out and play with our little girl, Margot, who's 3.5. I really kept her in mind when I was designing this space. Knowing that we had formal spaces in the house, I very intently wanted this to be a room that she could just be free in and be comfortable in and play. So we set it up with a pair of sofas. These are actually sofas that I already had. They've been reupholstered 3 times. So that's like one thing that you can take away from this is invest in the best quality upholstery that you can, because it will live on with you for many, many years if you buy good quality. So these are by a maker called Varellin. It's the Hannah sofa. And I have, like I said, reupholstered them 3 times. They started out white, then they were moss green velvet, and now they're this sort of dusty blue performance velvet that we have here. And you can always have your cushions restuffed as well if they start to lose shape. So just super important to invest in the best quality that you can. But we had the 2 sofas already and sort of laid out the room this way instead of having 2 sofas across from each other as you traditionally would see in many floor plans, because this allowed a little bit more breathing room and space for Margot to play. And then rather than having a traditional wooden coffee table, which I previously had when she was learning to walk and it would make me very nervous, I had this custom ottoman made, and it's fully upholstered on the top, and then it has a shelf on the bottom which is filled with baskets, and those have all kinds of toys and magnet tiles and puzzles and things. So all of her things are easily accessible and we can play at any given moment, but we can also make the room look neat very quickly, which was important to me. So yeah, we hang out here all the time, but of course we still have some fun art in here. This series is Victor Vasarely. It's a series called Phantoms, and I had these framed and I just loved sort of the graphic composition of them. And growing up, we actually had some close family friends that were very much like grandparents to me, and I remember they had some Vasarely pieces, which I didn't know at the time, like as a little kid, but in hindsight, like I now realize that's what they had in their house, and I guess that made an impression on me, and so I'm still drawn to that as an adult. But you know, everything's very casual in here. The sofa fabric is performance. We have these great linen pillows that I had made and some fun fabrics. This Jane Shelton fabric, and it reminded me kind of like of a Marimekko print, but on a smaller scale. And so I liked sort of the vintage nod that gave. And then this beautiful Katie Lead print that's sort of Indian inspired, like a block printed textile. I love the blues and greens for this space. Those are colors that, you know, we're all drawn to because it's what you find in nature. They're the colors that clients request the most from me. So I'm always tickled when somebody wants pink or red or something different, but I love blues and greens, and obviously they're very easy to live with. The fabric on the ottoman is also performance. The rug is 100% wool, so super easy to clean. So all of that was super, super important because this is where we spend so much time. And then you'll see I have a lot of books. This is just a portion of them because this house has lower ceilings than our old house did. I also had a big bank of shelves at the old house, but I think there were more shelves and they were significantly taller. I actually had to downscale quite a bit. So that was quite the challenge. But you'll see the shelves are really filled with a variety of things. And I think the number one mistake people make when they're styling bookshelves is that they forget the books. And so then they're just filled with like random tchotchkes and pottery and like an object. And that's great. Like those things are important and they certainly add interest to shelves and texture and color and whatnot. But they can't be the only things. So even if you're not a huge reader, pretend that you are and buy books that are interesting to you on topics that are of interest to you. Collect books when you travel. That's an easy souvenir to bring home. A lot of my books are travel, houses, design, of course. But it's just a variety of books that I've collected over the years, and then pottery that I've picked up on my travels, framed family photos. You'll see pieces of art that are leaning and different like objects, and I just feel like having that dimension, that sort of layer adds interest and makes them feel less flat, because it is a lot of space. And if all of the books were going the same direction, it just starts to feel really heavy. So it is important to have some books standing, some on their spines like this, to have kind of a pyramid effect when you're styling a shelf. So just imagine you're drawing a triangle. Does the eye go up at any point? That's going to make for a more successful styling moment or a more impactful vignette, and something where like the eye is able to travel and bounce around versus just like being flat the whole time. So yeah, that's one of the things that I think we're really good at is styling shelves, both at our design firm and our shop. This is one of the few rooms, one of the 3, that has actual drapery or curtains in it, that the windows allowed for that. So the former owners of this home worked with a wonderful architect locally, the Kelly Cusimano Architect is his Instagram, and they bumped this room out. So this was a den, and it was sort of enclosed and kind of dark. I've seen the listing photos from 2 times ago. So when the people who sold it to us, when they bought it from the original owners, and it was a much smaller space. But interestingly, they really only added, I want to say it was like from here to there. They bumped the room out a little bit, like it might have been a few feet, but it made a huge impact in terms of opening up the space and allowing for a better flow and more possibilities for furniture layouts. And so these windows and doors along the backside of the house are new, which allowed us to hang drapery. And this drapery features one of the tape trims from my collection from Schumacher. This is the Porte Parisienne, again, inspired by Paris. It was a door detail that I saw. It was like made out of rivets that I thought was super interesting. And it inspired me to translate that into something that was super usable in a variety of applications. So that's where we got that. And we have this lovely view of our garden. I live in the West University Place neighborhood, and the thing that makes it so special is the proximity to central Houston, downtown Houston, the Med Center. It's a great location. It is also like a small town. It's annexed. It's its own municipality. So we have a lot of benefits in that sense. But where we make a sacrifice is we have much smaller lots. So we don't have huge backyards, but we get to really know our neighbors because everybody's out on the street and, you talk to people. And I think it really fosters a sense of community. So we don't have a huge yard, but it's really lovely, especially in the spring with the wisteria and the azaleas and everything blooming. And we have lots of boxwoods as well. I think it's really important when you're setting up a space or designing a floor plan to think about, and this is not something that I made up, but something that I learned from Bunny Williams, another one of my design heroes, that you should always have a surface handy. Every seat should have a surface handy on which to place a drink. So again, it just goes back to comfort and graciousness, like being a good host, anticipating the needs of the people living in the house, yourself, if you're designing your own home. Is there a place for me to set my drink? Is there a place to kick up my feet? Like, just think about how you're utilizing that space. So here, because I didn't want to take up a lot of room, and I was also very cognizant when we moved in, Margot had just turned 2, or was close to turning 2. So I needed tables, side tables or drinks tables that were kind of low to the ground and very stable, that wouldn't tip over easily with a little toddler toddling around. So I just used these porcelain garden stools that you could easily put outside as well. And they work great. So now I'll show you the other spaces that we spend the most time in as a family. We have our breakfast room and our kitchen. So like any young family, we spend a ton of time in these spaces. If we're home, we're here at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The former owners worked with an architect, as I had mentioned, to open up the space and reconfigure it. Before, it was a little bit more enclosed. It was very choppy. They didn't have a breakfast room, and so they were able to redistribute the space to create a breakfast room. There are pantries on either side, and it's just really nice because I feel like I have the best of both worlds in this house. I have my formal areas for entertaining. I have the definition and distinction between rooms and wall space to display art, but then this back part of the house where we spend so much time in the day-to-day is really open. So I can be preparing dinner in the kitchen at the island while my husband's answering a few last emails on his laptop at the breakfast table, and our daughter is, working on magnetiles and playing in the family room. So we're all together and we can see each other and talk and then come together when dinner is ready. So it's just really nice and creates a nice flow for the way that we live. In the breakfast room, I utilized a pedestal table. This is from Serena and Lily. So it's kind of a fun spin on a classic saran and tulip table, but the base is wrapped in raffia, which I think brings some nice texture. And then we have these great wicker chairs. I had the cushions upholstered in a fun fabric from Casablanca, and I had the fabric laminated because I knew we were going to be spending a ton of time here. I had a young child, and so I don't have to worry about spills or messes. I can just wipe the cushions down. So it's super easy maintenance. And then this pendant is the Orsay from my collection with visual comfort. So it kind of adds like a modern kind of graphic, unexpected touch, while everything else is a little bit more preppy. And these pieces here I picked up at the Paris flea market on one of my trips. They are lithographs by one of my favorite artists, Raoul Duffy. They're these beautiful landscapes and they have a lot of movement to them and have really beautiful blue hues and yellow and green. So they just felt like they would be the perfect way to brighten and cheer up this breakfast room. If you want to follow me into the kitchen, I can tell you about this space. So as I mentioned, this was fully reconfigured by the previous owners, but they had quartzite countertops and a different backsplash, different lighting, different hardware, a different paint color, I believe, all different plumbing fixtures. So we really we took the footprint of the space, but made it our own through different aesthetic touches and new materials. The countertops are a beautiful honed Chaldea marble, which has some really pretty green and gray veining. The backsplash is one of my favorite things. This is from Ann Sachs. It's New Ravenna is the maker, but it was purchased through Ann Sachs, and it mimics a caning detail, which I think is so interesting because you would see that typically on chairs or other types of furniture. It's another French reference, but it's executed in this very unexpected way, and I still feel like I have a crisp and clean kitchen that's classic and won't go out of style, but this is something that's so unique that I haven't ever seen in another house, so I love that. And then some other very classic things. I have a Shaw's farmhouse sink that it's just, as classic as it gets. They've been around since 1897. It's really functional, beautiful Perrin and Rowe plumbing fixtures, so beautiful faucet. And I have mixed metals here. So I do this a lot for clients. I think it's very easy and appropriate to mix metals. I'll often use polished nickel on plumbing fixtures because it has a beautiful warmth to it. It's a beautiful finish, but it's a lot easier to live with and more forgiving in terms of watermarks and patina and just the way that it ages over time, because a lot of these finishes, the most beautiful finishes I think are living finishes. But you'll notice on our cabinet hardware, we have unlacquered brass. And so that was a fun way to mix in a different element and add some warmth to the space. The Urban Electric pendants are also in a brass finish. So they complement one another, but add a layer of dimension and interest because it isn't all the same in one note. The island is a different color. We often do these contrasting islands, and that could be in a beautiful wood stain, it could be in a color. And I feel like, again, it breaks up the cabinetry because when everything is the same, even though this isn't a huge kitchen, it can just feel a little bit overwhelming. My cabinet color is Benjamin Moore Halo, and I love this color because it has a little bit more depth and feels like a nice warm neutral, and it still kind of reads like a crisp white kitchen, but it's not a white kitchen. It's a little bit more elevated, has a little bit more warmth, and I feel like this is something that will age really well over time. I've had my interior design firm for 13 years now, and I also have a retail store called Paloma Co. that I opened 6 years ago, and I've had a very unorthodox path into design. I don't know that I really knew what I wanted to do when I was
college age or high school age going into college. I didn't have a very clear understanding or definition of what I wanted to do. I taught for a few years, and in the last year as a teacher, that summer, I started writing a blog in 2007 called La Dolce Vita. And I wrote that for, goodness, almost 15 years. I just wound it down, I guess, a few years ago. But for the longest time, I would post 5 days a week and sort of built a following that way. And I have to say, in 2007, blogging, influencing was not at all what we know it to be today. I really just started because I wanted a creative outlet. I'd always enjoyed creative writing and was bored in the summertime when my friends in other careers were working and I was home from teaching. So it gave me something to do. And around that time, we bought our first house. And so I started looking for design inspiration. And there were literally maybe like 4 or 5 design blogs that I could find at the time. And their styles were very different from what I gravitated to. And so very organically, I just started posting things that I was finding and researching in books and magazines and people that inspired me, designers that inspired me. And so my blog then really started to take shape and gain traction. So I did that for a very long time. In 2011, my husband works for a lighting manufacturer called Visual Comfort here in Houston. I had been tutoring his young son in Spanish at the time after I left my teaching job and was sort of freelancing and figuring out what I was going to do with my life. And one day he called me and said, you know, we've had this company for 25 years at this point, and we've never had a formal marketing department or a marketing director. And I've interviewed all these people and none of them know how to market themselves. Would you meet with me? And I said, well, you do know I'm a former teacher and have 0 marketing experience, but sure, we can meet and talk about it. So I went into his office and I was so nervous because I knew I was completely unqualified for this job, or so I felt. And I remember him tapping on his computer screen. I've told him this story and I don't know that he remembers it, but I remember it very, very vividly. It's imprinted on my mind. He tapped on his computer screen and said, you know what's happening in there. And he saw that, you know, this digital platform, like the digital world, was really the future of marketing. And so he took a chance on me and hired me, and I was there for several years. And then I started to get the itch again to go out on my own. And I realized, you know, I really sort of like doing my own thing. I learned so much at that job. But from there, I decided to hang my shingle and take a chance. And I sort of helped, you know, I dabbled in design, helped friends with paint colors and like, what should I do in this room? And would consult. But this person came along and they had a full job for me, a full decorating job of a big house. And she took a chance on me and I took a chance on myself and we did it. That was 13 years ago. And in that time, as I mentioned before, we started Paloma and Company, my retail store, in 2019. I've now written 2 books, the most recent of which is called The New Classic Home and came out in the fall of 23. And I also have some licensed product collections with Visual Comfort. We do lighting and we do decorative tape trims with Schumacher. So it's really expanded into this very multifaceted business that I love because it's never boring, it's never dull. And my favorite part is still working with clients, of course. We just installed a house this week and it's just so fun to see it all come together and to see how much the client appreciates it in the end. So we spend a lot of day-to-day informal family time in these spaces, but what's really nice about the location of the kitchen is it's also right next to the dining room where we do more of our extended family and formal entertaining. So I'll show you that space next. Welcome to my dining room. This is really one of my favorite and most special rooms in the house. It is something that brings me joy every time I walk into it. The walls are up, they're swathed in one of my favorite wallpapers. So this is a wallpaper that I've loved for as long as I can remember. It's by DeGournay, so it's all hand painted by artisans. This is called Portobello, and it's their original colorway on Electrum paper. So it's sort of this like soft, warm silver background, and it picks up the light throughout the day in a really nice way. It sort of glistens and, you know, it changes throughout the day as the light changes, which I think is really special. But all of this is painted by hand. And when you really start to zone in on some of the details, like
the feathers on the birds. You see the level of detail, how fine these brushes must be, the hours that it must take to do something like this. So for me, it really feels like this room is kind of like a living art installation. And it just sort of beckons the outdoors in. So I love that every day of the year, regardless of the season, it feels like spring in here because we're surrounded by these beautiful blooms and birds. And you know, this chinoiserie theme is something that's fairly prevalent in my work. I've done a lot of it. I love it. I gravitate to it. So that kind of sets this traditional tone for the room. I paired intentionally this wallpaper, which can feel very formal, with a very casual rug. So the rug on the ground is a sisal rug from Patterson Flynn Martin. It's the Kino pattern. So it has kind of a geometric thing going on. It's this beautiful warm sand color. And that really serves to keep the space from feeling too fussy and over the top. You know, I didn't want it to feel terribly formal, even though we do entertain more formally here. But we're not like fancy people with a butler. We just, you know, like to have a beautiful space for special occasions. The dining table was something that I designed. So it has this really pretty base, this sort of fluted base, pedestal base that I just think is super classic. And I'd had a round table at my old home, my former home. So this room kind of called for a rectangular table or an oval table. And it's been really nice because we can entertain more people. And actually, these chairs are one of my very favorite vintage finds or antique finds. These are from the 1930s. They're André Arbus, a French designer. They're made of acacia wood. And I found these on a trip to France. And the dealer who had them wasn't there. He wasn't in his stall. So a neighbor called him, you know, told him in French that I was interested in the chairs, gave me a price. I thought about it. I was like, I don't know, that's probably more than I want to pay right now. And I didn't have a need for dining chairs. But then we left and I was still thinking about the chairs. So we got in contact with him again through our shipper and made a deal. And I got the chairs, and they're honestly one of the things that I love the most. And they were originally upholstered in like a sort of light gray micro suede. That's what the dealer had put on them. And I lived with them that way for several years in our old house. And then when we moved into this house, it just felt like the gray would be very dull against this wallpaper, and I was going for more color here. So I actually had them upholstered in a Jerry pear suede. This is real suede in this kind of heather color, which I think is really pretty and feminine, but there's something about it that, I don't know, feels a little bit more sophisticated, maybe because it has kind of like a dusty quality. It's not like sweet lilac. And it just works so beautifully in this room because it complements and picks up on a lot of the colors that you see in the wallpaper. And speaking of which, you know, I kind of wanted the elements in this room to complement the wallpaper and not detract from it. So for drapery, I opted for this beautiful Schumacher Incomparable moire. This is actually a linen cotton blend, and it has this beautiful moire sort of pattern in the weave. In spring green is the colorway, and it feels a little bit electric and unexpected to me. So again, it's that like unexpected element that you're not looking for in a room and that kind of surprises you, but then you wrap your head around it and it just works. So I think it kind of jolts this room with some energy and makes it feel sort of inspired and fresh and interesting rather than going like a more traditional fussy route, which a lot of these elements, if they were arranged differently or paired with different things, could go that direction. So for me, it's going back to that like core mission or like my real like style sense is to mix modern and traditional pieces and to bring together what would be seemingly disparate things in a way that feels really well thought out and kind of collected over time. So, you know, your drapery kind of adds that bold element. This piece came out of a show house that I did. I did the Kips Bay Show House in Palm Beach in 2022. This is a beautiful photograph from the Big Blooms series by Paul Lang. And I had this in my show house room and just fell in love with it. Loved the jolt of pink, the beautiful tones of the yellow, the pollen in the center of the image. And it just felt like the right piece for this room. and kind of plays upon, the subject of the wallpaper, but something about photography can feel modern and crisp and sort of lend that element to a space. This buffet is like a faux shagreen, and I just love the clean lines of it. It felt kind of mid-century. These table lamps here, buffet lamps, are the Orsay from my collection. Again, like bringing in a modern element to a more traditional space. And then the chandelier and sconces are also pieces that I designed. This is the Brigitte. This was inspired in a combination of like Murano and Georgian style chandeliers. I loved those swooping arms, but I chose to design it in a way that felt a little bit more usable and modern. Mercury drops are from an artist I found on Cherish. They were doing a pop-up. Cherish was doing a pop-up at Bergdorf's. And I saw them there, and I love them. The colors sort of work perfectly with the colors in the wallpaper. And what I like about these is it wasn't like hanging another big piece of art and covering up the paper or having something that felt like a complete juxtaposition. It's almost like they are coming from within the paper and are like a three-dimensional element of it because the color palette is so similar. So I don't know, these are another thing that like people are always surprised by, and they're like, oh, that's so perfect there. They love it. We didn't talk about the fabric on these chairs. So another thing that I often do is pair two different types of chairs with a dining table. So we'll have a side chair and then a host and hostess chair. These are super comfortable. They're in the style of John Saladino. This fabric is also by Casablanca. It's this beautiful flame stitch. I love the movement and that it was just kind of a neutral to pair well with, that sort of heather mauve color of the suede on the side chairs, because if these were a bold color, I feel like the room would get crazy. So that sort of quiets everything down. And then in this little corner, we had the opportunity to bring in a banquette, and we actually do use this when we're entertaining, like either at the end of a meal or before a meal. People will sit here and chat and have a drink. So it's just, really pretty, sort of in the style of Maison Jansen. It's in the strié velvet and has a really pretty tape trim detail with some nail heads spaced every other. And this Samuel & Sons trim is kind of a similar color to the suede on the dining chair, so it ties everything together. But it's just a fun little space. Again, this is also a place where on typical days, like sometimes I'll sit here with Margot and we'll just look out the window and see, people and dogs walking by and recap her day at school. So it's a nice little space. Why don't I show you the powder room next? Follow me. So surprisingly, the powder room is actually a lot of our friends' favorite room. They'll come and they'll be like, oh wow, like I think it's unexpected again because there's a cool wallpaper in here. And I was very conscious of not having too similar elements throughout the house. So because I have a chinoiserie wallpaper in my dining room, I wouldn't have done that a few steps away in the powder room. Everything again like ties together. It's part of the same story, but the scale here is different. The colorway is different. I used another Casablanca textile here. This is one of their wallpapers, and it mimics the look of like a basket weave, which I think is really interesting. And now I hadn't thought about this, but I'm connecting the caning on the tile in the kitchen and now the basket weave here. So I guess I'm into textures, decorative textures used in unexpected ways. So it's very neutral, and there's a lot of contrast here, part of which comes from the black lacquered door that sort of beckons you into the space. And then I have these really fun Urban Electric sconces in there, the Belmead sconce that I've put some Fermois shades on that are in this like magenta color that's really energizing and kind of shocking. And so against this very neutral background, I think they really pop. We also have a roll faucet in that room, and we actually repurposed one of the countertops from the kitchen. So the old countertops that we took out, I actually really liked the stone. It was a pretty quartzite, and I wanted to add a little bit more like color and not have this just be another white countertop in the powder room. So we took that and had a new countertop made for this room. And then we reworked the cabinet too. It just had like overlay cabinets, and they had a lot of moldings on them and felt very heavy in 1980s. So we worked with our carpenter to do just like flat slab cabinet doors, and that made it feel sort of like more contemporary. And we have these really cool like brass finger pulls that make it feel kind of unexpected and give a nice juxtaposition to the Chippendale mirror, which is in this like plaster white, and the traditional wallpaper. And then you'll also see another piece by Raoul Duffy that I picked up in Paris. This one is a beautiful, another still life, but it's anemones. So beautiful flowers in a beautiful vase, and just brings cheerful color into the room. So I've shown you all around downstairs. Let's take a peek upstairs and I'll show you the different bedrooms. So as we arrive upstairs, you'll see there's a great series of abstract pieces here by Catherine Booker Jones from Alabama. I love to collect art, as you well know by now. And we had this great big wall here, sort of an opportunity to create a moment and do something impactful as you arrive on the stair landing. So these are really cool. They're actually just these abstract geometrics that are painted in a variety of different colors on top of antique French documents that she found. So some of them are, dated back quite a few years. They're invoices, they're notes, they're all kinds of things. So it's really fun to sort of look at them in detail and see what they're all about, but have a lot of texture and movement, and just think they're like a fun, unexpected touch up here. Next, I'll show you my daughter's room. So this space is probably my second favorite after the dining room, or maybe my most favorite. It's really special to me. She had a really beautiful nursery in our old house. It had chinoiserie wallpaper, so it was really, really pretty, but I struggled with what to do for her in this room, in our new home, because I wasn't sure. I still loved what we had done in the old house in her nursery. I didn't know if I should repeat it or maybe do something new. And I decided to do something new, but sort of up the ante a bit. So I worked with an artist out of Virginia, Riley Sheehy, and she's known for her beautiful illustrations and watercolors, and does these very whimsical sort of Bemelmans inspired illustrations that she's very known for. I reached out to her and said, hey, I would love to collaborate and do something for my daughter's room. So she painted a beautiful scene. It must have been like a 3x5 painting. And I have the original somewhere, but it was essentially the scene that you see on each of these walls. And then she and I worked together to scale that to fit the exact size of the walls in this room. And she had it printed as wallpaper, and then we had it installed. So it's just really special that I can tell my daughter that she's the only one in the world who has this exact wallpaper, and that's like just something so cool and unique. And we sort of peppered it with different things that were really special to her that she and I love. So you'll find Madeline, the character from the beloved books, in the mural. We have some of her favorite animals, giraffes and squirrels and elephants, that are all layered throughout, and some of her favorite colors and other things. So it felt like something that would spark her imagination. I wanted her to spend time in this room and really be inspired and to dream. And I think, this feels girly, but it can grow with her for an extended period of time. It isn't so specific to any period of her life. So this is certainly one of my very favorite things. And when she's a preteen and wants to paint it purple, I'll certainly be sad to see it go. But until then, we're enjoying it. And this was another one of those rooms with the shallow windows where we couldn't do drapery, which was a challenge for a small baby or, toddler at that point that was still napping. So we have these also London shades like what you saw downstairs in the living room. And they're in this beautiful Marie Chantal bloom print for Schumacher. It felt very girly and pretty and just, feminine. And behind that, we have blackout roller shades that are automated and on a remote that I can lower and raise when it's time for her to sleep. And so these stay perfectly fluffed at all times. We don't have to maneuver them at all because we have those shades behind them. We actually have that downstairs as well too, but those are grass shades. So it's just kind of a seamless way to live. It's really nice. And then we have this étagère from Serena and Lily, and it's filled with toys and books down there, and we have a variety of books on the shelves and framed family photos. This little piano she got for her first birthday, and still at almost 4 years old, she uses it all the time. She plays it before she goes to bed to, prolong the process. And I think piano lessons may be in her future. And then we recently, not too long ago, converted from her crib to a toddler bed. So she's really enjoying being in a big girl bed. But yeah, we, don't spend too much time in here. We're mostly spending time as a family together downstairs, but it's really special to have bedtime with her every evening and, getting her ready in the morning. So I know she loves her room and always talks about how pretty it is. Someday she tells me she wants to do it all in rainbow, and she'll tell me that our house is ugly. So God help me when she's a teenager. One thing that was important when designing this room, or when I design any room for a child, for any client, is that it grows with them and that it doesn't necessarily speak to a particular age. I'm big on kids being kids. Like, I love dressing my daughter like a little girl. My husband bemoans how many shipments we get from Europe from like English and French and Spanish clothing and shoemakers, but I just love those traditional clothes. And someday she will want a graphic t-shirt, and I will eventually cave. The same goes for rooms. Like, I love for there to be an element of sophistication and also the flexibility to grow within a space for a child. So, you're not going to find me doing like printed bedding with a special like cartoon character on it, at least not yet. But for clients even, like, we'll find what is the kid's favorite color, and we'll work with that and create something that feels tailored and beautiful and sophisticated, still childlike, but that gives the client the flexibility that it can go from age 3 or 4 to age 10 or 12 potentially, and then they feel better about making that investment, because any room that you decorate is obviously an investment. And so with kids especially, you want to have that longevity, and materials are also super important to consider. Kids are going to be rough on their things, so just having fabrics and whatnot that are going to stand the test of time is really important. What's nice also is that the former owners, when they worked with that architect, they reconfigured the bedroom. So this bedroom and our guest bedroom once shared a Jack and Jill bathroom, but they were able to redo that, and now there are special like individual ensuite bathrooms in each one. All right, next we'll head over to my guest room. So welcome to our guest bedroom. This house is only 3 bedrooms, but we're a family of 3. And as I mentioned, we looked for a house for over a year, so we made it work. The nice thing about the bedrooms is that they're all quite large, so they feel really gracious and spacious, which is very nice. This room is utilized by family if they're visiting town, or friends, not all that often, but it does get some use, which is nice. And I wanted to do something in here that felt really fresh and cozy and inviting. So the walls are upholstered in a ticking stripe and this soft spring green, which is really pretty. And then we have these nightstands, which are by Oomph Home. They're really side tables, but we use them as nightstands. We don't really need storage in here. The table lamps are also from my collection. It's a Sylvie, and it has this beautiful pleated silk shade with a very modern brass column. These plaster mirrors I also found in Paris, and we carry in the shop sometimes. And then this piece of art is by an artist named Kimberly Moore, sort of a collage, and I just love the composition of it. The scale and size also felt perfect for over a bed, so it was a perfect piece for here. And I love that it's like striking and kind of graphic, but also quiet because of the color palette, so it really sort of keeps the mood in here the way that I intended. The bedding is from Matouk, and this is an Ian Mankin fabric. It's like a lotus flower, and I just fell in love with it. I thought it was so pretty, so we did that on a lumbar pillow there. And then I'll show you, there's a sweet little window seat here. So there's like a built-in along this wall that was put in at some point, some beadboard, some storage. We sort of carried over the ticking stripe from the walls on this cushion, and then you see that beautiful lotus flower print on these pillows as well. And this is a little sweet spot to curl up and read a book and hang out, and it's also a nice spot to drop things if you're spending the night, spending the weekend in this room. It's additional storage space or surface space, if you will. There's a built-in desk, as I mentioned, and that's kind of nice to have because my husband will work from home from time to time. I rarely do, but he usually does, and when he does, it's at this desk. This is also one of the tape trims from my Schumacher collection. It's Parisian bamboo, and it's just a really classic motif that I think works so beautifully in this space. The bed in here is actually from Serena and Lily, and I had this in my guest room in our old house. And I guess we're starting to pick up on a theme here. Clearly, I love caning details. I love just the crispness of this. It's sort of a nod to Louis XVI style furniture, but done in a modern interpretation that's like cleaner lines. So I love the caning, the warmth that it adds to the space. I think the white frame with the caning is really crisp and nice against the backdrop of the ticking stripe wallpaper. And then this bench is not fancy. This was, I think, Ballard Designs. I also had this in our old guest room, and then I covered it in a new fabric. So I probably spent as much on recovering it and adding the new designer fabric as I originally did on the bench itself. But sometimes you have pieces and they just work. So we made it work. I'll show you the bathroom quickly. As I mentioned, they formerly had a Jack and Jill bathroom connecting the two guest rooms, or this guest room and my daughter's room. And so now this was all redone as ensuite bathrooms. So that's really nice to have the privacy. And when we bought the house, we changed everything other than the countertops. So the quartz countertops were here, and then we changed out plumbing fixtures, cabinet hardware, tile, lighting, all of the other elements. So it really feels fresh and personal to our taste. All right, well, now I'll show you my bedroom. Follow me to the primary. So as I've mentioned a few times, each room in a house, I really do believe, can have its own distinct point of view, its own personality, its own color palette. The important thing is that there's a through thread, a commonality that like ties everything together throughout the home. That can be as simple as white paint, and that can be walls, trim, there has to be something that ties it all together. So this room may feel like an outlier, but to me, it really sort of works with the rest of the story of the house. It's chocolate brown, and I love sleeping in this room. It just feels like I'm enveloped in this delicious chocolate cocoon. It's so cozy and so inviting to me, and was inspired by another one of my design heroes. Well, two actually, Billy Baldwin and David Hicks, who both used brown rooms a lot. It was David Hicks who used what he called Coca-Cola brown. So this is sort of a nod to those amazing gentlemen and how much they've inspired me over the years. You'll also notice that I used the same fabric on a lot of different elements in this room. So I think what's interesting and makes the room successful is that the palette is really crisp. There's a sense of discipline and editing in this room. You have the crisp walls with the contrasting casings or moldings in a soft white. The drapery and the half tester canopy on the bed are just an ivory linen with a chocolate tape trim, and that feels almost masculine and very edited. But then we brought in something that was sort of fun and unexpected, a really cool element, which is this Brunswick fille Letouche fabric, which is one of my favorite fabrics of all time. It might be my favorite pattern. I feel like it's so versatile. It was introduced in the early 1960s, and over the years, Cravat and Brunswick Fille have introduced several new colorways, and now they make it an outdoor fabric and whatnot. But this particular tan colorway has been one of my favorites because I feel like it's super versatile. And I already had a little bench on the other side of the room, which you'll see in my house. And I was like, where am I going to put that? And I had the idea to do this Letouche room for a while, actually. I was like, if I do a show house again, maybe I'll do a Letouche room, but I ended up doing it for myself. And I had these two upholstered chairs made. They're the most comfortable chairs in the house. This chair is actually my very favorite place to sit. I love to sneak away once I get home. I love to change into my PJs or like workout clothes, comfies, right after I get home from work. And I'll come sit here and like scroll my phone for a few minutes, and then I'll go downstairs and make dinner and be mom and do all the things. But I love this fabric. So These chairs are super comfortable. They have a great pitch, a great depth. They're tufted both on the back, the sides, and the seat. I had the tufts, the button tufts, covered in a chocolate grosgrain just to give them kind of a graphic quality and add some contrast. This piece of art is also by Alexis Walter, the same artist who did the painting above the mantle in the living room. And I just love how these colors sort of pop off of the wall against the chocolate background. This soft pink adds a little bit of femininity to the space. And then this floor lamp is from my collection. It's the Olivier swing arm floor lamp. It has this really cool hexagonal detail in the tubing. So that's just kind of a thoughtful design element there and super versatile. It's a really cozy place to read. In the rare occasion that I actually sit and read at home, I usually do it on an airplane. These lamps are Christopher Spitzmiller, and they're in this sort of antique silver glaze, which I think is really pretty. And the scale is really fun because they're kind of overscaled and tall. It was a nice idea to then bring in this half tester bed and kind of draw the eye up in the room. I wanted a full canopy bed. I was entertaining the idea of like full canopy with 4 sides and all the drapery. And my husband really has to sleep with a ceiling fan. We live in Texas. It gets very hot. And I feel like if you sleep with a fan, you know, like you just have to have it. So he had to have it, and we settled on a compromise, which was doing a half tester. And the canopy is also lined in the Letouche fabric. So the exterior matches or mimics the drapery in the room. And then the interior has that fun little hint of pattern as well. The bedding is also from Matouk. It's this pretty embroidered scroll in a chocolate color. And we have this chocolate lumbar velvet pillow with my Grinnell tape on it from Schumacher. Pretty blanket from Matouk. And then this is an antique bench. It's nice and crusty, and it's gilded, but a lot of the gilding is chipping off. And I kind of love that patina and that you see the age of it. You know, like I do think that there's something interesting and charming about having pieces that are patinaed and not totally perfect. And of course, this piece is also upholstered in that Letouche fabric, and you can really see the movement of the pattern quite nicely. And I've paired these guys I had since that first show house back in the day. It's a Venetian silk velvet in olivine from Schumacher. So those little rolls have been with me for probably 10 years. And then in this corner, we had an opportunity to have a vignette. We don't really, like I said, I don't work from home. My husband has that desk and that built-in area in the other bedroom. So a desk wasn't something that I wanted in our bedroom. So we just found this console. It's simple Parsons style grass cloth covered console, and just a place to display some books and framed photos of our darling girl. And this is a really cool Italian vintage lamp from the 70s that I found when I was treasure hunting. It has a cool raffia shade, and I just feel like it just feels like geometric and sexy and like unexpected. And then this undulating mirror, I think, is another fun way of adding some movement to the space. I'm a very firm believer that a house is not a home if the people who live in it are not considered. So you can have a beautiful space, but you really have to design from a place of functionality. And I don't just mean, is something comfortable or does that chair work in that spot? But really assessing the needs of the people who live there and the way that they live. How do they entertain? How do they spend time together? What rooms do they spend time in? And what time of day are they using that room? All of those things really inform what the design should be. And for me personally, you know, having just recently moved into this house just a couple of years ago, I loved our former house, and we were there for 5 or 6 years. There's some really special memories there. Our dog, who passed away before we moved into this house, you know, was really tied to that house, and we brought our daughter home there. But when you start to pack things up, you just sort of, it's funny. I feel like home, there's a house, the shell, but home is really the things you love and the people you love. And once you start to pack those away or strip those away, it just doesn't feel like home anymore, right? So it's really important to fill it with the things that have meaning to you and that are special to you and that tell your story.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to go to homeworthy.com for exclusive content, shopping guides, and so much more.